Before we move on, let's just give a little note about debts. First, I want to say that some debts are okay, though I would never actually say a debt is a good debt, just because it's better to do things without debt if it's possible. But some debts are okay to take on in moderation. For example, student loans would be one. Up to whatever salary you expect to earn after you graduate, having student loans up to that point tends not to be overly burdensome. Having a mortgage. As long as your total housing expenses are no more than a quarter of your take-home pay, having a mortgage is probably okay. Now, the big thing about these two debts is that they fund investments that will either increase your income or decrease your expenses in the future. Right, so student loans you're using to pay for a college education. College education, then, we know is correlated with getting higher paying, better jobs that tend to be more stable. And so on the whole, you're going to have a higher income in all likelihood if you get a degree than if you don't get a degree. With a mortgage, when you buy a house, eventually you will pay that house off, at which point you're going to have a substantial drop in how much you have to pay in order to maintain that home every month. So here you're funding an investment where later on you're going to have lower housing expenses. Right, so taking a mortgage is not a terrible idea. Now, some debts are bad. I put credit cards under this. Carrying a credit card balance from one month to the next is extremely expensive typically, and normally what really makes this bad is that it funds some kind of consumption. Right, so you go out to a restaurant, you buy food, you eat the food, you pay for it with a credit card, and it doesn't help you pay your credit card back. Right, so the key thing about the okay debts is that, in a sense, the thing you're buying with that debt is going to help pay the debt back. The student loan pays for education. The education, in turn, helps pay off your student loan because you get a better job. It's not true for most of the things that you buy with credit cards. Now, some debts I would put in this other category that's kind of in between, I'd call dicey, where depending on the specific case, it might be okay, it might not. I put auto loans in this category. Right, if it's absolutely necessary for you to go out and borrow money to buy a minimally functional car so you can get to work, then okay, the auto loan is funding an investment that's necessary. But as soon as you start adding on features to that car, so it's doing something more than just getting you to work, then it starts turning bad. For example, if you're buying a brand new car, then almost certainly that auto loan is a bad thing. After all, new cars, we know, are not actually very good investments. They tend to lose value very quickly. Now, so on the whole, because this type of loan, the auto loan, is so dicey, I would suggest that it's probably best to, say, get a loan for your first car, but buy your second, plan to have enough money saved up that you can buy your second car with cash. Now, naturally, that means, now we all know that our first cars are normally terrible. Our second car might still not be awesome, but it's much better than thinking about, am I actually spending this on just the car I need, or am I spending it on the car I want? If you're paying for it with cash, don't worry if you're buying the car you want rather than one you need. Okay. Alright, now moving on then to talk some about savings. The question is, what do we do with that 20% of our income that's going towards savings? Here I really suggest there are two stages to the plan that are very important. The first is preparing for emergencies. The second would be building wealth. Now, the process we can then break down. We have these two stages, but really there are 4 steps. First, we want to get $1,000, or if $1,000 doesn't feel workable to you, $500, right? So some amount of money that's substantial in an emergency fund. Then move on to paying off your debts with what we call the debt snowball. If any debts you've already accumulated, pay off with that method. Third, we want to get our emergency fund up to 3 to 6 months of living expenses. If you want to buy a home, then a down payment for a house would come after you get that emergency fund set up. And then finally, the 4th step really has 3 different parts all happening at the same time. First, 10% of your income is going for retirement, 5% going for dreams, and then 5% going toward prepaying your mortgage. The key point here is that steps 1, 2, and 3 all happen in order. Then you go under step 4. Steps 4A, 4B, and 4C all happen at the same time. So before you even think about saving for retirement, get that $1,000 in emergency fund. get your debt snowball happening, pay off all of the nasty high expense debts. Get your emergency fund up to 3 to 6 months of living expenses. That way, if emergencies happen, you're ready to go. Right? After all, those emergencies are probably going to happen before retirement, so you want to have that money set aside first. Then we can start thinking about retirement. At the same time as you're thinking about retirement, think about your dreams, that pool, that Ferrari, whatever, and also think about getting that mortgage prepaid to save you on interest in the long run. So going into more detail on each of these steps. With step 1, it's $1,000 in an emergency fund. The key here is to get it as quickly as you possibly can. Preferably get it within a month. And ask yourself, what can I do to try to raise as much money as I can in the next month? Now, it might be something like you might need to trade in, if you have a reasonably nice car, trade it in, buy something that's cheaper. That difference can be your emergency fund. Sell stuff you don't need. I just recently moved. I found out we have boxes upon boxes upon boxes of things, and I had no idea we even owned them, let alone do we need them. So have a yard sale. Try to sell some of this stuff. Get on eBay. List it. Find what might possibly sell for a reasonable amount of money. Or maybe taking on a short-term part-time job. After all, we're only talking about $1,000 here. If you can take on an extra 10-15 hours a week, you can get that in a reasonable amount of time, since this will be extra money above and beyond what you're used to earning. So taking on just for a short time, just to get that $1,000 there sitting there. Now the reason we're going with $1,000 is that it's a reasonable number, but yet a psychologically important number. Right? It feels like a significant amount of money, and will therefore encourage us to actually be able to follow through on the further steps of the plan. At the same time, $1,000 is also a nice amount of money because it will cover the grand majority of small emergencies we might have. For example, for most of us, our small emergencies are car-related. I have very old cars. They will often break down or get some kind of problem with them, and for a few $100s I can get it fixed. The most expensive thing I ever had to have done with my car was getting, there's an air conditioner compressor that had to be replaced. That was roughly $1,000. Everything else has been less than that. So this $1,000 will get you through an emergency without you having to pull out the credit card. Once again, huge emergencies, say getting a major illness, I'm not going to cover that, but it will cover most of the minor or moderate emergencies you'll run into day to day. Step 2 is what we call the debt snowball. This is a method used for paying off your debts. The idea is you just take whatever extra money you have, put it toward paying off your smallest debt. Once that debt is paid off, take that money that was going toward that debt, put it toward the smallest remaining debt. To kind of clarify exactly what this means. Right, so suppose you have 3 debts. A Visa with a $2,000 balance, you're paying 18% interest, $40 minimum payment every month. You have a MasterCard with a $5,000 balance, a 20% interest rate, and a $100 minimum payment every month. And then you have a student loan with, say, a $10,000 balance, 6% interest rate, and $100 a month payment. Now suppose you have $300 you can put toward debt repayment. Naturally, we have to hit our minimum on everything. So $40 toward Visa, $100 toward MasterCard, $100 toward student debt. That leaves $60 left. That $60 in extra money should go toward the smallest debt. So $60 extra toward the Visa. So we start out in the first phase of this debt snowball putting $100 toward each of our 3 debts. Then once the Visa gets paid off, we take the $100 that was going toward Visa, put it toward MasterCard. Once that's paid off, take the $200 that would be going toward MasterCard at that point, put it toward our student debt. To give an idea of how this works, here's a graph of the debt sizes for these things over time. The lowest one would be the Visa. We're paying $100 a month, so we pay it off in roughly 24 months. Then we take that $100 that was going toward Visa and put it toward MasterCard, which would be the next line up. So you can see once our Visa is paid off, suddenly we're paying off the MasterCard much faster. Once that happens, we put the $200 that was going toward MasterCard, put it toward our student loan, and the student loan vanishes much faster. Now the really key point here is that every 2 or 3 years you're getting a debt paid off. Right? So it's one less bill that you're seeing every 2 or 3 years. So you feel like you're making a substantial amount of progress. Right? So $300 every month. You pay everything off in what ends up being 78 months. The total payment then would be $23,400. You paid off your Visa in about 2 years, MasterCard less than 3 years after that, student loan about 2 years after that. These periodic victories give us these psychological wins that really help us stick with this method. That's the great benefit to the debt snowball, these psychological wins. Now, some of my economist friends might point out there's actually a better method. We'll get to that. For now, let's compare to what many people would try to do. Let's just make the minimum payment. In that case, you're paying $240 a month for the first 93 months. That's how long it takes for you to pay off your visa if you're only making the $40 monthly payment. After you do that, you spend the next 15 months paying $200 a month on both your student loan and the MasterCard. Then you get to still pay another $100 a month for another 30 months on top of that. If you add this all up, you see you're going to spend over 10 years paying these things off, as opposed to the 7 years under the debt snowball. The total payment here being $28,320. So the debt snowball, it looks like it saves you something in the neighborhood of $5,000 comparing the total payments. Now let's move on to what my economist friends would say is an even better method, right? Or an optimal plan. Here, pay $300 a month, but focus on the high interest debt first. Right, so here, it is true you'll be paying things off a little bit faster. Everything's paid off in 76 months. That saves you $600 compared to the debt snowball. So total payments are $22,800. The problem here is your first victory doesn't happen until almost 4 years into this process when you pay off your MasterCard. So the debt snowball does cost you another $600, but it gives you victories every 2 to 3 years. That's really the key benefit of the debt snowball, is feeling these things get paid off. It feels good. It gives you the energy to keep going and pay off that next debt. Feeling like you're making progress is often a key to actually getting your debts paid off.